right, we're back. Graveyard Shift Movie Podcast, episode 119. And this week, computer's still not here. Don't worry about it. So deal with this for now. Hopefully next week it'll be back. Don't worry about it. But this week we're actually talking about a movie instead of me just being real sad and talking about random topics. And we're talking about a movie that I was very excited to watch because I wanted to watch it when it came out in 2016, which is The Forest, starring Natalie Dormer of Game of Thrones fame, Princess Marjorie or Queen Marjorie, I think she became at some point. But yeah, starring her, and it's about the Suicide Forest in Japan. So that's pretty cool. We're looking for a dead body in the Suicide Forest. There's a part later on where they find like a dude hanging, and all I could think about was the Logan Paul video. But yeah, I was very excited to watch this one, and boy, did the movie not live up to the hype I had for it. I'm gonna give it like a fucking 3.5, dude. I didn't like it at all. Honestly, I think they went too complicated. I think they went too. They had these storylines of like we'll get into it, but with parents and they just went too complicated with it. Like, it's the Suicide Forest. It's just a creepy place. You could just do a straight up, we're going exploring in the Suicide Forest. I guess they're trying not to just do what's been done before, so they're trying to come up with stuff that, that's different. But yeah, I don't get it. It was just, there used to be, I don't know if it's still around. I haven't checked it in a while. I know that most of those guys like branched off and did their own thing, but there used to be a YouTube channel called it was like TFIL. I'm not sure what the fuck it stood for or whatever, but if you guys know like Sam and Colby, like those guys used to be a part of it. Corey, I don't remember his last name, but and Sam and Colby have gone on and they like have their own channel and they do. But they used to do all these overnights at places, and there would be like a ghost and it was all fake as shit. Like Sam and Colby still do it, where they're like, all right, it's a haunted mansion or something, and always the most crazy ghost shit you've ever seen happens. And they like to say like, oh no, this is all real, but it's not. But it's entertaining. But TFIL did a video where they went to the Suicide Forest, and it's like an hour long, and it's just them walking through the forest and like just creepy shit happening. And that's all you need from a movie like this. I don't know why they have these weird acid trips, but no one's on acid. It's just like weird people freaking out. There's like a murder deceit plot in here, it's just there's possibly a cucking storyline going on. Yeah, I don't know. I just think they went too complicated, over the top with it. I could have just done with a simple creepy ghost movie. If there was ever a time to rip off Blair Witch, this was the time, just to have like creepy shit happening. But anyway, hey, spoiler warning for The Forest 2016. I'm gonna ruin everything about it. So if you've never seen it, my friends, you've been warned. The movie starts off with Natalie Dormer having a dream about, we don't know it's a different woman, but it is. It's a different woman running through the Suicide Forest, screaming for like help and shit. And then she wakes up and immediately just starts packing and to like get on a flight. I hope you enjoy watching Natalie Dormer have like 7 different dream sequences throughout the movie, because she does it a lot. That is a mainstay of this movie. It's just her having a dream and then waking up and being like, oh boy, that was creepy. So she takes a flight. She gets to Japan, and this movie made a decision that instead of just having the movie start with her like getting all this news and then deciding like I'm gonna go to Japan, they decided to have a 5-minute scene of her driving around in the backseat of a taxi in Japan where you don't see any of the scenery. You just see like the lights on the window as she's in the backseat looking at everything. And we get flashbacks to her getting a call from the Japanese police telling her that the missing persons report has been filed for her sister. And there's an awful line where the Japanese cop dude is like, I hate to tell you this, but she was last seen outside the Origami Forest or whatever, a place where people have been known to commit suicide. And then Natalie Dormer is, what? Like, it's just, there's a lot of that type of acting in this one. So, yeah, she's freaked out. Her husband in this movie, the almost cucky, if you will, is like, listen, she does this shit all the time. You know, don't worry about it. Almost like Midsummer with the boyfriend talking about, you know, listen, your sister does this all the time. But Natalie Dormer is like, whatever, fuck this. I'm gonna go to Japan to look for my sister because she's been missing for 48 hours at this point, and after 48 hours in the suicide forest, the cops are just of the assumption that, oh, she must have gone through with her plan to commit suicide. So she goes to Japan. They're still in the taxi, and finally we get done with the flashbacks, like giving you the setup to the movie, and then there's just a random homeless man jump scare where he just slams onto the glass of the window and spooks her. And it almost got me because it was so cheap. Like, you feel safe in this like taxi cab, and then the next thing you know, they're fucking throwing a homeless guy at you. So that's the first scare of the movie, is a dirty bum jumping onto the window and scaring Natalie Dormer, who plays an American in this movie. But there are times where her like British accent like slips out, and it's like, oh, you know, so. I'm dying. This is all staying in. I took a sip of water, and that shit almost killed me. Oh my god, that's what I get for calling that guy a dirty bum. All right, excuse me. So so that happens. She gets to the hotel that she's staying at, and that night, once again, she has another dream. And this one, she's going into the basement of, I guess, what we'll learn is her old house, but I wrote down in my notes that I guess this must be like her old house. And as she goes in the basement, we see this yellow tent that we learn belongs to her sister, but it used to be to both of them, because we see a photo of them both as children sitting inside the tent. They're both identical twins as well. That's kind of a part of this movie, because that's why she's convinced her sister is still alive, because she's like, we're identical twins. I could, you would feel if something had happened to her, you know? So she sees the tent, and she opens it up, and we just see, like, her sister sitting there. And then the sister just turns into like a demon face and hisses at her. And honestly, it made my stomach jump because it was very unexpected as well. I was like, oh, fuck, what the fuck is that? But then, once again, Natalie Dormer just wakes up and, everything's all right. The next morning, Natalie goes to... Also, her name in the movie is Sarah. I guess I'll try calling her Sarah. It's Sarah and Jess. Jess is the one that's missing. Sarah is Natalie Dormer's. I say Natalie Dormer's character. Natalie Dormer plays both of the twins. And the 2 or 3 scenes we get of the twins interacting with each other, it's always like just over the shoulder, so you can never see, because it's just Natalie Dormer playing 2 people. They didn't go to the extent of, the Parent Trap doing like that. It's very cheap double twin acting. They should have fucking cloned her and got a second Natalie Dormer clone out of a factory to play Jess. I think that really would have made the movie. Give it an extra couple points if they would have went through the trouble of cloning a human being for the sake of cinema. The next morning, Sarah goes to visit her sister's school, and she walks into the class, and then this one student just starts like flipping the fuck out and screaming and shit. And it like fades out, and we come up, and they're in like the principal's office, and they've given her like some orange slices and like a water or something to calm her down. And she's like, she only speaks Japanese, so she's talking through the principal, and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was Jess," and they knew that Jess had gone into the forest, so she thought that it was her spirit. And according to her, when people die in the suicide forest, their souls are never at rest, and so their spirits come back and they're angry because they're not able to move on. So that's why she was all scared and shit. That's basically the end of that scene. It's just, they just talk about the angry spirits, and then the lady's like, "Oh, crazy." Fucking, what is this? Oh, this is, yeah, so after that is when you get a flashback of them interacting when the sister's about to move to Japan. And I wrote down, like, look at this bullshit. It's just the same over-the-shoulder shots and stuff. So at this point, I kind of blanked out because the movie was kind of dragging already at this point, right? So I thought that Sarah had just gone to this resort near the suicide forest, but it ends up being like a morgue because she comes in and she's like, "Hey, I'm looking for my sister," and the lady's like, "Oh yeah, she's here." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, maybe she's staying at the hotel." But she takes her into this basement, and once again, like, Sarah like is scared to go in the basement, and it gets explained later. There's a whole bunch of basement shit in this fucking movie. So they go down, and then they go through the hall, and they open up a door, and we see it's like a morgue, and there's like 4 bodies under sheets. And the lady's going to pull down the sheet to show her the body that she thinks is the sister, but then they hear like a commotion coming from upstairs. So she's like, "Oh, sorry, I gotta leave for a second." So she leaves, and Natalie Dormer is left alone in the room, and she starts hearing like noise coming from the body that the lady was about to pull the sheet down from. So she goes up to the body and pulls the sheet down herself, and we get a very quick shot of like a decaying woman. But it's literally maybe like a second on screen, and then it cuts away. But apparently that was enough time for Sarah to be like, "That's not my sister." We didn't get a good look at her, but I guess the character did. So she's like, "That's not my sister. My sister's still alive." So she's like, "Listen, can you help me navigate the suicide forest? I gotta go in there and look around." And the lady's like, "Fuck no." Like, she's like, "No, we don't go in that shit." So Sarah's like, "Well, fine, fuck you, I'll do it on my own." So she leaves, and I guess she doesn't have a taxi. I don't know how far away her hotel is, but she's like, "I'm going to my hotel." And she just starts walking down the street with her luggage. When she leaves, it's daytime. By the time we cut to her again, it's like dusk. The sun has gone below the trees, and there's just like barely any light left. And then like a scene from Angels in the Outfield, or whatever that fucking movie is. Just like 7 schoolgirls just come walking out of the forest next to her, and like walking by her, and I was like, "Are these ghosts?" But then she turns around, and it leads into like a bar. So I guess they were real. I don't know where the fuck they came from, why they were in that forest, but they were. And so she sees the bar, and she's like, "Well, I could go for getting fucked up, So she goes in the bar. She's having a drink. And of course, this dude sits down next to her. This is when the cuck storyline starts. And I don't remember. Like, we saw the couple scenes of the husband, like, not coming with her and being like, oh, your sister does this all the time and stuff. But later on, we get like a scene or two of her trying to call him and him not answering and stuff. So they're trying to make you be like, oh, the husband's a piece of shit, you know, but, it is what it is. But this dude sits down next to her and they get to talking. And it turns out that he works for a travel magazine in Australia and he lives in Tokyo. So he can speak Japanese and stuff. And they're talking, and she's telling him about her sister that's missing and is in the forest and shit. And so he says, well, hey, I have a guy who will take me into the forest because of the magazine I work with. So I could get him to bring you with us the next time so we could look for your sister. And she's like, all right, great. And he says that, yeah, but he wants to write about the story of her looking for her sister. He's like, it's a really good story, so I would like to write about it. And so she's like, sure, whatever, fucking, I don't care. So he's like, cool. So he pulls out a phone, and immediately he is like, well, can I interview you? And she's like, yeah. So he starts recording, and she's telling about like her, her life and how their grandmother raised them and all this shit. And he's like, well, where were your parents at? So she starts to tell him this story about how when they were 6, a drunk driver hit or crashed into her parents and killed them. And, they went outside, and it was like, I guess it happened right outside their house. And so they like saw their dead bodies in the car and shit. Meanwhile, we're getting flashbacks as this is happening. And we can hear like the mom and the dad like arguing, and then you just hear like a gunshot go off, and it's like, oh, So then for some reason, this fucking grandma, they just heard a gunshot go off in the basement. It ends up being the basement. This is where the big basement reveal thing comes from. This grandma takes them both down in the basement to look with her. Like, nothing you find down there is going to be good after what you just heard. What the fuck are you doing taking these 2 girls down there with you? But she does. And so they go down there and they find the mom lying on the ground dead. And I didn't notice it at first, and I don't think you hear 2 gunshots, but I'm pretty sure that the dad then like popped himself in the head, and he's laying over there dead too. And so they're like, oh shit. So the thing here is like Sarah turns away from it and she's like, oh God, But Jess like looked at it. And so they talk about like Jess, has held the darkness of that day and everything. That's why she's been the way she is and all this bullshit. But yeah, so that's what really happened to the parents. And that's why she keeps getting flashbacks and nightmares of walking down in the basements because of, what happened when she was, a little girl. Fuck, dropped my phone. My notes. Okay, I got it back, guys. So yeah, so they leave. They're like, all right, we'll meet up tomorrow, and we'll go into the forest. She goes back to the hotel, and she tries to call the husband, but he doesn't answer. And I wrote down, yeah, dude, this chick is totally gonna suck this dude's dick behind your back. So that night, she's like, she wanders out into the hallway of this hotel for some reason. I don't remember the reason why she did it, but when she does, she sees like this flashing light up above, like down at the end of the hall, and of course she's like, well, I gotta follow down there and see what that's all about. So as she's walking down there, she sees like this woman doing something. She's like bent over and she's facing the wall and all this shit, and I'm like, what is going on? And then eventually the woman turns and looks at her, and there's a jump scare where it's like a nasty old looking lady. And then it turns out it's just like an 85-year-old woman who's blind, who is in this hotel for some reason. And so, yeah, that's the end of that scene. It was just there to add, like, they're like, ooh, this is dragging along. We gotta add in a jump scare here real fast. And it was probably the worst jump scare of the movie as well. So there you go. That happened. The next day, she meets up with the Australian dude who doesn't have an Australian accent at all. He lives in Tokyo, works for a travel magazine in Australia, and speaks, and he has like an American accent. It just sounds normal to me. If you're not in, America, I'm sure he sounds weird. But she goes and meets up with him and the guide. And finally, after 31 minutes, they finally enter the suicide forest, of which the movie is named after. And they're finally walking around in here. The dude's like, all right, listen, whatever you hear in here, it's fake. It's in your mind. Don't go off the path. And they're all like, okay. 5 minutes later, Natalie Dormer is off of the path, just looking around at the scenery and freaking out, like hearing whispers, looking at the grass and like thinking she can see like the grass growing. Keep in mind, she's not on anything. Like, we've covered movies before where there's been psychedelics involved, where this makes sense. Midsummer, one of them. Shrooms, another one. I think there might be a third one in there, but I'm not sure. Nothing of that sort is happening here. She's just freaking out immediately. That should probably be a sign that, hey, maybe you shouldn't come in here when you're already freaking out. Eventually, they come across a guy who brought a tent with him, and according to the guide, when people bring a tent, that usually means that they're not 100% sure they want to do this. So he's like, stay here, I'm going to go talk to him. So as he goes and talks to him, the Australian dude is like asking Natalie Dormer questions again. He's like interviewing her some more, and I can't remember. Well, no, when he's interviewing her, he just asks her like what they'll do if they don't find her today, and she's like, "We'll come back tomorrow." And he's like, "Well, what if we don't find her tomorrow?" And she doesn't have an answer. And then he like shows her that he stopped, quotation marks, stopped the interview and puts the phone away. And then he asks her if the sister had ever tried to commit suicide before, and we find out that, yeah, 2 times, and both times she took sleeping pills. And there's also some bullshit where like her favorite poet apparently killed him or herself with fucking sleeping pills or something. I don't know. The weird thing, I was like, is the sister the poet, even though she's not? Because the poet had the same first name as her, and they never talked about the last name. So I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, we learned that she has a history of this, so it's not just a new thing. I took a successful sip of water that time. Immediately after that, they find a rope, and the guy's like, this is what people do if they're not sure they want to kill themselves and they want to find their way out, or if they want people to find their body later. And so they follow the rope, and sure enough, they just find the guy hanging there. And once again, all I could think about is like, did we just find a dead body in the suicide forest? And just, come on, dude, you never seen a dead body before? Like, that's all I could think about. The only thing this was missing was like the guide wearing like a Pikachu fucking a Pikachu hat or whatever. But yeah, this is nothing. It's just to be like, here's a dead guy, and so they like cut him down and shit. So they go walking again. They keep hearing weird shit. And then at one point, some wind blows in like a different direction. And so Sarah's like, can we go this direction? And the guy's like, I guess, So they go the direction that the wind blew her. Eventually it gets to the point where the guide is like, listen, we're several hours away from the trail at this point. We need to head back, because if we, it's hard enough finding our way in here right now. Once it gets dark, we're basically blind and the temperature drops. But as soon as he says that, they look over and they find Jess's tent. And so immediately Sarah's all excited, being like, oh, she must be close. And her clothes are hanging out on like a line to dry. I guess she washed them and shit. And she gets all excited. So they call around for a little bit, but Jess never comes out. So the guide is like, listen, we know where this tent is, so we'll leave, come back tomorrow morning, and we can start looking for her, from here. But the sister's like, no, she's going to come back. I just got here, I flew 6,000 miles to find her. I'm not leaving. So, of course, dude who's thinking with his dick is like, well, I'm not leaving either. And so he decides to stay with her as well. So he's like, fine, I'll come. The guide is like, fine, I'll come back tomorrow. You guys don't move at all. So the dude stays. They set up like a campfire. Jess doesn't show up at the nighttime. They're talking. He's telling her some bullshit story about like his little brother who used to get in fights all the time and he would bail him out. But then he got sick of it and decided to let him fight on his own. But then his brother got messed up and like went deaf in his left ear and shit. And so that's why he always like comes running whenever his brother's in trouble, so he understands what she's doing. And then she's like all sad, and so he like puts his hand on her knee and she's like, I'm gonna go to sleep. And he was like, okay. And so she gets to go in the tent and like close it up and be in there. And dude who just came here to get his dick licked during the night is like having to sleep outside, like cold, yeah. There is a weird scene as they're, well, not weird because they try to make you think stuff in a little bit, where she has her flashlight open and she's looking around in the tent. And so we go outside and we see the Australian dude like looking at her silhouette, and he's got this weird look on his face. And then once the light goes out, he closes his eyes as well. So it's like, oh, what's going on, with this? So that night, of course, she has a nightmare where stuff is running around her tent and spooking her and trying to grab at her and stuff. And eventually she opens up the tent and looks out, and we see 3 random granny spirits that run at her, and then she wakes up. I take back what I said about the lady in the hallway. That might have been the worst jump scare of the movie. She wakes up and comes outside, and she looks, and like the dude's sitting there sleeping. And it's quiet, but then she starts hearing a noise in the forest. So she follows it and eventually comes across like this schoolgirl. She's in a school uniform. And the lady is like, she's kind of smudged in dirt and stuff. And the lady is like, oh, are you, Sarah? And the lady's like, yeah, how do you know my name? And she's like, Jess. I've met Jess or whatever. Jess says that she needs your help. And Sarah's like, oh, where is Jess? And then the girl she says it twice. She just says, don't trust him. And this is right after the scene I talked about where he's staring at her through the tent. So it's like, ooh, maybe there's a murderer about, So then something happens that spooks her, and she goes running, and she like trips and falls and cuts her hand on like a mushroom or something. And the dude is like, oh, what happened? And she's like, oh, I met this girl in the forest, and she told me, and she stops herself because she realizes that she was talking about him. And she's like, oh, she told me something in Japanese. I don't know what it was, So the guy's like, all right, well, let's go back to camp. So the next morning, he wants to head out because he's like, listen, your hand is messed up. That girl is, out, so we can go and get a rescue team and try to find her. But Sarah, who now doesn't trust him because of what the girl said in the forest, is like, well, that the guide said for them to stay put and he would be here at noon. And the dude's like, yeah, but that's 7 hours from now or whatever. So eventually he wins out and she decides to go with him, even though she, is all skeptical about him now. Um, so they walk for a little bit. Eventually, they come by a river, and Sarah's like, "We didn't pass this river on the way in," and he's like, "I know, but we can follow it down, and that'll lead us to civilization." As he's saying that, she looks down, and she sees a body floating down the river, and it's floating to the left. And then he sees it too, so that body's real. He's like, "Oh damn," you know. So then he starts walking to the right, and she's like, "What are you doing? You're taking us back the way we came. We were walking this way." And he said, "No, we're following the river down. That's what we're doing." And she looks back, and now the water is flowing to the right. So somehow the water switches its current directions, and just, more weird, trippy shit that's happening. So apparently they are walking the right direction. They're walking for a little bit, and they start hearing someone talking, and the Australian dude calls out to them, but then he realizes that it's just his phone in his pocket that started to play a voice recording of them at the campfire last night when he was not supposed to be recording. He's supposed to tell her when he's recording, and he wasn't telling her then. So she gets pissed. She starts accusing him of, like, lying to her. She's like, "Do you even have a brother?" And he's like, "Yeah." And she's like, "What's his name?" And he takes a second, and he's like, "Mikey." And then she's like, "What ear is he deaf in?" And he can't remember which ear he said that he was deaf in. And so he admits that he wanted to get closer to her for his story, and he just wanted to get closer to her because she was a hot girl in the bar that he saw, So she's like, "Give me your phone." And he's like, "No." And she's like, "Give me your fucking phone." So finally he's like, "Okay," So he unlocks it and gives her the phone. And as she's going, and she's like, "I'm deleting all the voice recordings. You no longer have permission to use my story." And after she deletes the voice recording, she looks in the photos, and she finds a photo of Jess on his phone. So now she's convinced that this dude killed Jess. And she's like, "What the fuck did you do to my sister?" And he's like, "Give me the fucking phone," And she's like, "No." So they start fighting for the phone. Eventually he, like, shoves her down. But she gets up and just runs away. And he's, like, calling out to her, but she isn't listening, And she runs for a little bit, and then she stops, and she has another one of her weird acid trips where she's, like, looking around at the scenery. We see a snail that it's like its head is growing bigger or something. Yeah, I don't know. And then she finds, like, a roll of yarn, and I'm like, "Oh, cool, this is going to be important." Spoiler, it's not. After she finds the yarn, we cut over and we see that the guide shows up to the tent and sees that they're both gone. And so he's like, "Oh, fuck," So, back to Sarah. The yarn, she uses it as, like, a trail. But the trail doesn't matter because the trail doesn't start at where the entrance is. So it shows her the way out. It's just showing her, like, where she's been. But that doesn't matter unless she finds her way out. You know what I mean? But either way, she's leaving the yarn trail, and she keeps hearing, like, a whisper, like, "Sarah, look behind you." And we keep seeing, like, this ghost. I'm pretty sure it's the spirit of the dude who hung himself that they found earlier, because it looks like that. And it's, like, popping up behind her, and then it'll be, like, on the left of her and shit, but she never looks behind her until eventually the thing just pops up, like, right on her back. And she gets scared and goes running. She drops the yarn. So that's it. That's the end of the yarn thing. I guess maybe it counts. She runs and she falls into a random hole that's in the ground. And so now she's stuck in this hole. We cut back over to the guide, and we see that he's brought a rescue team. And the husband has arrived. We had gotten a voicemail from the husband earlier on in the movie that said if he didn't hear from her, he was gonna get on a flight and come out there and try to find her. So he's shown up as well. She wakes up in the hole and lets out like this big ass scream, and she's holding her ankle. So I'm like, oh shit, her ankle must be crushed. But no, not really, because she immediately like gets up, and for the rest of the movie, she just has like a slight limp. Like it doesn't really matter at all. Um, she finds like a crack in the wall in this hole that leads into like this cave system that she wanders into, and eventually she finds the schoolgirl that she had met in the forest. And the schoolgirl's like, "Oh, you're here. Come with me. Jess wants to see you." But then Sarah's like, "Why would Jess be down here?" And the girl just gives her like a creepy smile and goes running off into the dark. So Sarah doesn't really have a choice. I guess she could just turn around, but she doesn't. So she follows. She goes down the hole, and eventually she comes across the schoolgirl who now has turned into like a demon spirit thing and chases after her, and a bunch of like demon faces like are popping up around her, and she runs back into like the little area that that she fell in where the hole is. So she goes back in there. She's yelling for help, and eventually the Australian dude finds her. That's why I was saying maybe that's what the Yarn did. I guess maybe he might have found it and followed it and found that she was in this hole. But also, she's very happy to see him. But I'm like, doesn't she think this dude is a murderer right now? Why would she be? I guess, she's in a bad situation. So maybe she's like, whatever, this dude will help me get out. But either way, she's like, oh, good, help me out of here, So he's like, okay, I'll be right back. So he leaves, and as he leaves, she hears a fly flying around. That's what they do. It's in the name. And eventually the fly lands on the thing. I thought it was a pocket knife, but she grabs it, and it turns out to be one of those like slideshow toys, where you and it's a different picture and one of those things. And so she uses it, of course, and we see a bunch of photos. It's the day that the mom and the dad died or whatever, and them sitting on the couch. And eventually they go down in the basement, and then there's like a zombie dad jump scare on the camera that freaks out the girl, and that's it. It's just another bullshit jump scare. Eventually the dude gets back, and he lowers down a rope, and he gets her out of the hole. She immediately then goes from being happy to him being like, "Hey, I found a ranger station that might have a radio," and she's like, "What? Just now you found it?" Because now she's back to being like, "This dude's a murderer. He's lying," So he's like, "Listen here," and he gives her a knife, and he's like, "This is so you'll trust me more," So she has this weapon. So they start walking. Eventually, she goes over to like a stream to wash out the cut that she got in her hand a while back. And when she opens up, we see maggots on her hand. And then we see maggots crawling up her arm under the skin. So she pulls out that knife, and all the maggots like collect in her wrist. And so she's about to like cut open her wrist to get to these maggots, but the Australian dude like calls out to her, and she snaps out of it in time, and so she doesn't do it. They get to the ranger station, and I was expecting like the big tower, kind of like what was that, Firewatch, if anyone, kind of like that guy who he was a ranger, kind of like the tower in, if you played Until Dawn, that like, I don't remember his name, but the bitch girlfriend who's the worst character in the game, and in that other, like the dude with the football jacket and shit. But I was expecting that. But this is just a wooden shack in like the middle of the woods that's run down and shit. It looks like a place that a murderer would take people to murder, and that's what she thinks is happening, right? So they go inside. There's a radio that dude starts to mess with. And then immediately after giving her the knife, he's like, "Hey, let me get that knife back." Oh, all right. Thanks for interrupting, guy. I don't know if you guys heard that, probably. But he's like, "Hey, let me get that knife." Because he wants to pry open the the front of the radio to mess around with it because it's not working. But she's like, what? Why? You know? And he's like, just give me the fucking knife. So she gives him the knife. He's messing with the radio. She finds a door that she's like, this must be the basement, but it's locked, you know? But then, on the other side of the door, she hears Sarah, and it's her sister's voice. And she's like, yeah, it's me. And the voice is like, shh, you know, telling her to be quiet. And it passes her a note under the door asking if Ariel is here. Or Ariel or Ian is his name, something like that. And she's like, yeah. And so she like passes her another note that's like, he'll kill us both, you know, you need to get the key. So she's like, okay. So she goes digging in these cabinets and she finds a knife. And the dude is like, hey, do you want this candy bar? You can have it, you know. And so Sarah just like stalks towards him. Like, I don't know how this dude wasn't like, hey, what do you have behind your back? You know what I mean? Like, just stalks towards him. And eventually grabs his arm and puts the knife up on his neck. And she's like, I'll fucking kill you. What'd you do to my sister, you know? And he's like, what are you talking about? And finally he snaps and he's like, she's dead. She's been out here for 5 days. What are you doing? And she's like, she's behind that door. Give me the key now or I'll kill you, you know? So the dude's like, fine. The key is in my boot. So he reaches for his boot. But then he just jumps up and tries to grab her. But they fall over and he lands on top of her and he ends up getting stabbed in like the chest. And as he's dying, the fucking door opens up. And of course it was all just a big ruse. Because once again, we literally started off the thing by being like, hey, anything you see or hear in here is not real. So yeah, the whole murder thing was just the demons and the spirits, you know, deceiving Sarah and making her believe that this guy was good. I don't think there was even a photo of the chick on his phone. I think that was just the spirits putting that in her mind. But he dies, so she goes walking through the door, and once again we're in the fucking basement with you know, with the dad and the mom. And this time the dad, well, first off, her sister, who's in kid form, is standing there, and she tries to like cover her eyes so she doesn't see it. But then the dad comes alive again and is like crawling on his elbows towards her in like fast motion. They sped it up, and then he like grabs her hand, and the whole time she's like, "Daddy, no, please, Daddy, no." And it's just at this point I was over this movie. And so she's trying to like saw his fingers off with the knife. And eventually, she, like, wakes up again outside, and she just starts running. And randomly, in the middle of her running, we just cut over to Jess, who's just standing there, perfectly fine. Nothing's wrong with her. She's just been lost. And so she starts running as well. And then there's, like, Jess can hear the sister, and they, have like, it looks like the sister running right behind Jess, and for a minute I thought that it was about to be Trilogy of Terror round 2, where it turns out that they were the same person all along and this chick was just crazy. But Jess sees the rescue party and she goes running for the rescue party who's out here walking around. It's nighttime by this point already. They're about to leave. But Sarah gets stopped by that schoolgirl ghost again. And so Jess makes it to the rescue party, and they're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you're alive." And she's like, "Yeah, I know." And so then they're like, "Is Sarah with you?" And she's like, "I thought she was with you, you know?" And we go back to Sarah, who's standing in front of the schoolgirl ghost, and the schoolgirl smiles and looks down at Sarah's arm, and Sarah looks down and sees that she's cut open her wrist. And so the whole thing with the dad grabbing her wrist and her trying to like saw his fingers off, it was all once again fake. So she just like slit her wrists, and so she basically died down in that basement there. Then like some spirit demons pop up from out of the ground and grab her ankles and drag her into the ground. Um, yeah, and so Sarah's dead. So the sister who you don't give a shit about made it through the movie, and she's alive now, and apparently perfectly fine after 5 days alone in the suicide forest. So they pack everyone up. They or no, before they do that, they're like, "We'll come back tomorrow." And Jess is like, "No, we need to go in now." But then she stops, and she's like, "I don't feel anything. It's silent." And so once again, that's like the twin thing. So now she doesn't have that connection to her other twin because Sarah's dead. That's when everyone like packs up and they leave, except for the tour guide who stays behind for a second to look into the forest, and he sees a demon Sarah who does one last jump scare towards the camera, and that is the end of the forest. This movie had a budget of $10 million, made a box office of $37 million. So there you go. I just popped my shoulder. Ow. I'm falling apart, guys. I gotta go to the doctor later too. I got a lump in my neck. I think I got a tumor. So that's pretty cool. Best of worst of for this one. Worst of is gonna be the 3 grannies at the campfire jump scare. It sucked. It was terrible. So take that. Best of honestly might be the little girl in the tent with the demon face. It was just unexpected. Made my stomach do a little jump. Yeah. So I think that was my best of. And that's basically the end for The Forest. Like I said, I was really excited to watch it, and it did not live up to the excitement. I wish they would have kept it simple, just been a creepy ghost movie. But they went with this psychedelic type of route that I wasn't a big fan of. Maybe other people are, but it just didn't work for me. So yeah, you win some, you lose some. So anyway, so next week, hopefully it'll be Bride of Chucky. I know I've said that for 2 weeks in a row, but yeah, the part and everything was here. It's getting done, so hopefully that'll be there, or that'll be fixed, and we won't have any more of these issues. So it'll be Bride of Chucky. Then spoiler, you'll hear at the end of Bride of Chucky, the next movie we were watching after that was Barbarian. We were supposed to watch it already, but I didn't want to do it on like this laptop setup because it's a pretty popular movie, and I assume there's going to be like a lot of clips I want to include, and I can't really do it on here. So yeah, so Barbarian, and then we'll get back into the other Chuckies, and then coming up, I think for the Halloween episode, we're probably going to watch Halloween Ends that just came out. Hear a lot of conflicting reports about that movie, so that should be fun. And then I'm sure we'll end up checking out Terrifier 2 at some point that came out, and people are like throwing up apparently in the theaters. So that should be something. But anyway, thanks for watching. Go check out the gaming channel. Even though the computer is busted, we luckily had like 3 videos in the vault, so videos are still coming out every week so far over there. Yeah, so go over there, guys, please. All right, thanks for listening. Next week, hopefully, like I said, it should be Bride of Chucky, and we should be back. All good, but anyway, hopefully I don't have like a tumor or cancer in this lump in my neck, but we'll find out. Yeah, so anyway, all right, thanks for listening. See you guys next week.